Hello everybody, today I'll be talking about Hamming code. Let's first start off with a little game. I need one person to come up as an assistant, and I shall now explain the rule.
Let's start by explaining the rule. You take any of those cards and then you copy it down to this piece of paper. But when you're copying it, you change one of those digits into any other digit.
Yeah.
So you can only change one of them. You can't just change two or change. Well, I mean, I suppose you could change none, but that would not be fun. So change one of the digit into another digit that's between 0 and 9. Simple,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
I'm going to turn around now. You do that. And once you're done, turn all of the cards upside down and then tell me.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Right. So I need to do some quick math here. 9加9+14+14+2+7+8+9+7+16。That isn't right. 9+9+17+18+19+20。7+18+19+20。7+18+20。So it's wrong. So if you know that those aren't correct, and it's within here, and then it's within here, and it's within here. So that must have meant that this is the number you have changed. Is that correct?
Yes.
And now I'm gonna try to get what this number was originally. So 2 plus 9, 7, 7, 8, 10, 19. So this was originally a 1, and you change it into 0. Is that correct? Right.
So all of you must have been wondering what has just happened. Did I maybe remember all the content on the 12 cards? Or perhaps I managed to read this guy's mind? Or is it neither of them? What has just happened is some information was sent. One out of those 15 digits were lost due to an error, and I was able to detect this error and correct it. What I just demonstrated is called Hamming code. Hamming code is invented by this guy called Richard Hamming. He originally intended it as a self-correcting code for error-prone punch tape readers. In the 1980s, Mr. Hamming worked on a computer called Bell Model 5. This computer takes input through punch tapes. However, those punch tape readers are unreliable, to say at the least. Sometimes they read the wrong input and send it to the processors and other circuitry, causing further problems that are a nightmare to diagnose. So it's of utter importance that the machine to tell when the input is not right. Of course, there are people before him that tries to do this. Their attempts were merely detection. So the machine can tell the input is wrong. It halts itself and flashes a little light that says, "Hey engineers, come and fix this up." Then those engineers could potentially run the tape through the reader again and see if the error reoccurs. And there were also attempts for the machine to correct the error by itself. One of those attempts was to simply duplicate the information 2 more times and have a tape that was 3 times the width of the original. And the way that this works is that when an error does occur, the 2 other copies of the same information would be correct, and the computer is able to vote out the wrong one. As you can probably imagine, this is extremely space inefficient. In fact, only 1/3 of the space on the tape is carrying actual useful information. Richard Hamming wants to do error correction in a much more space efficient way. Hamming code comes in different sizes. The one that I just showed was a 1511 Hamming code. So 15 represents the total number of digits, and 11 represents the number of digits that can be used to store actual data. Before you send the information off, you first need to encode the information. The way to do this is pretty simple. As you see on the left, in this grid, there are 4 parity digits, P1 through to P4, and there are 11 data digits, D1 through to D11. Let's first look at this example. So, if you add P1 up with the other 7 blue squares, so the sum of the 2 vertical columns should add up to a multiple of 10. And since you're trying to calculate P1 given the other data digits, you need to rearrange the equation to get this. The way you calculate P1 is simply you take the sum of the 7 blue squares, you round it up to the nearest 10, then you use that to subtract the actual sum of the 7 blue squares. And then you take that result and put that into P1. Similar story for P2, P3, and P4. After you encode these informations, you can send those off. The information goes through the transmission process and perhaps has one error happen to it. The receiver, on the other hand, should be able to tell where that error has occurred and correct it. So, this is what the decoder does. First of all, it asks itself a question. Does P1, D1, D2, D4, D5, D7, D9, D11 add up to a multiple of 10? And what we're talking about here is those 2 columns that you're seeing. So if they do add up to a multiple of 10, that essentially means that the first parity bit, P1, does check out, and that means the error must be in the other half of the grid. So if the 2 columns we call A, the inverse of that, so the other 2 columns, should be called A dash. The decoder then asks the same question about the other 3 parity digits. And at the end of this process, the decoder will have 4 yes or no answers. And then it notes down the sets where all the error could have possibly occurred, then it simply intersects those 4 sets, and that will give a single element that points you to where that error has occurred. If you look at this example, in our case, P1 does check out, so the error must be somewhere in A dash. P2 does not check out, that means the error must be somewhere in B. P3 does, so it must be in C dash. P4 also does, so the error must be somewhere in D dash. After you intersecting all those sets, you find out the result is P2, and P2 is actually here. That means the error has occurred to P2. To get the original value of P2 back, you simply use the aforementioned formula and you solve for the bad digit. The result of this equation would give you the original digit before it was messed up. Hamming's work has been widely applied in different areas, and one of them is transmission of information through a noisy channel. Similar to our demonstration, this involves sending a bunch of information through a channel that introduces noise to them. For example, sending digital information through radio waves. Sometimes you get sometimes you got interference from other radio channels, or sometimes simply cosmic rays could introduce errors to those information. Hamming code has the ability to track down where the error has occurred and correct it, given that the rate of an error occurring is decently small. Hamming code could also be used for storing information in a lossy medium. Philosophically, you can see this as sending information from the past to the future. The real use for this is in some RAID level of hard drives. Say a company has some hard drive configured in a RAID format, and one of them fail at a certain point. You can use Hamming code to recover the lost data, given that the number of failed hard drive is not too great. In our previous example, you must have noticed that the top left corner of the 4x4 grid is not filled in. And you probably want to ask, why was there no digit in there? Well, you could actually fill that digit in to add extra ability to detect but not correct 2-digit errors. The way that this works is that the additional digit on the top left corner will act as a checksum for the entire grid. That means that parity digit, when added up with all other 15 digits, should add up to a multiple of 10. And if that parity check succeeds, that means there is 0 error. If it fails, that means there's potential that 2 errors has occurred. Of course, Hamming code is not the only self-correcting error code to exist. A few years after Hamming published his finding, there was Reed-Solomon error correction. This error correction scheme made itself into the part of optical media standard. It is the reason when you could still play your CD, DVD, or Blu-ray discs, even though they're quite scratched up. There's also polar code. This one is a very, very recent invention, and it differs from Hamming code and Reed-Solomon in the way that it does not need information to be chunked. As we have studied our example previously, when you're sending a stream of information encoded in Hamming code, you first need to split those information into equal size chunks. Then you encode them, add the parity bits, and then send them off. This is not how polar code works. A polar code decoder has the ability to deal with information on the fly as they stream in. This special attribute of polar code meant that it was suitable for the 5G communication standard. Thank you for listening.